So I don't usually start sermons with a statistic, but I'm going to today. Did you know that all of the thoughts that we have, 98% of them are unconscious?
Mm-hmm.
Think of all the thoughts you have in a day. Terrifying thing, I know. Think of all the different thoughts. That's only 2% of what your brain is actually processing, at least consciously. 98% is unconscious, and our behaviors are driven by those unconscious thoughts. 98%. And our unconscious thoughts are driven by metaphor, repetition, well-known examples of things we see around us, and grammar. I'll say that again. Our unconscious thoughts, which also drive our behavior, those thoughts are driven by metaphors, repetition, well-known examples, and grammar. Okay, you got that? Okay, so just put brackets around all that and just move it over here for a moment. And for the moment, pray with me, please. God, we truly give thanks today for your glory and your mystery, your luminescent brilliance, for all that you are that is utterly, completely beyond our comprehension. We thank you, God, that you have given us your word so that we might know more about you, that we might understand more of your heart and your desires and your vision for us. So God, as we dive into your word this morning, may we be wholly and completely guided by your Holy Spirit. That what needs to fall away will fall away so that we can see even more of you, even though we always know it will be only but a glimpse. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts bring honor and praise to you now and always. Amen. Amen. So we are continuing today into our Summer Cinema Sermon series. It continues now through about mid-September. And these sermons are all based on stories from the Bible that would make great summer movies. So romances in the Bible, superheroes in the Bible. And of course, who here has seen Independence Day? Star Trek? Right? What summer is complete without a great big humongous blockbuster, right? And of course, what's the big blockbuster in the Bible? Revelation. So we're starting with the blockbuster. So last Sunday was part 1, and today is part 2, and next Sunday we'll wrap it up about Revelation, and then we'll head right into the superheroes. So just to recap, because I know not everyone was here last Sunday, we talked about Revelation starting with the word apocalypse. And apocalypse is a big scary word for us, but in the time Revelation was written, it wasn't a big scary word. And in fact, apocalypse referred to a specific kind of genre of literature that was metaphorical, that was visionary, that was written to help people pull curtains away from their eyes to see what maybe they couldn't see before. We compared it to the story of Scrooge. You know, we know Scrooge isn't real, and that it was this fantastical story that helped to show how one miserable human being could be transformed into a decent human being, right? And that's what apocalyptic revelation or literature is. It's all about metaphors and visions and very strange stuff to help us see in a way we haven't been able to see before. And we talked about how the central character of the book of Revelation is Jesus the Lamb. And that the word for lamb was arnion, which is actually more accurately translated as something like fluffy. That Jesus, this picture of Jesus in Revelation is so gentle and kind and comforting, and it's very, very different than this sort of warrior Rambo-like Christ that is often portrayed as Revelation is usually interpreted. And then we learned about that the beast in Revelation, that we sometimes, if you've heard that word, is tossed around as like that's the Antichrist, right? That's the one who's going to rule the world in the end times. And we've learned that actually the beast, at the time Revelation was written, was the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was persecuting Christians and Jews so horrifically. And John wrote the book of Revelation about the beast, about the Roman Empire, to give people hope that that beast was not going to be in control forever. So that's what we covered last week. Now, the really weird thing about Revelation is that we all probably have a very different relationship to it. How many here were raised in what you would call an evangelical Protestant environment? Okay. So those of us who raised our hand probably got a good dose of what I'm going to talk about today. All right? How many here were raised Catholic or maybe Episcopal or Lutheran? You never heard anything about Revelation, if anything. How many weren't raised in anything and you don't want to have anything to do with Revelation? All right. So this is the glory of MCC. It's the mix of all of us together. But the thing is, no matter what tradition you come from, we live in a culture where millions of people believe in some version that is called, for lack of a better phrase, the end times. And you might be one of those people, and if you are, that's fine. It is very much a part of our culture today. Or you may never have even heard that phrase, depending on your background. But the reason we are looking at this, as we will soon hear, is that there are so many people in our country that believe in this thing called the end times, that it really permeates our culture and changes our culture in a certain way. And it's important to know what that is. So there are a lot of people. When I say a lot, I mean a lot. I'll say more about that in a moment. They believe that the book of Revelation is not about the Roman Empire. They believe the book of Revelation is really about specific events that are going to happen when the end of the world is near. And as Sarah Helen will tell you, we talk about how as long as we were children, we've been being told the end is near, it's near. And Sarah Helen's dad told her, oh honey, when I was little, the end was near too. Yes, the end is near, but people still believe it. And there are a whole lot of folks who believe that there are some very specific events that Revelation actually predicts. And I'm going to review those very, very quickly and not spend much time on them because, man, it is quite a roller coaster ride. So are you ready for this crazy ride?
Sure.
Okay, yes. Fasten your seatbelts. All right, first of all, they believe the book of Revelation predicts that Israel will become a nation, which did actually happen in 1948. They believe that born-again Christians, born again, I'm sorry Catholics, you're going to hell. Born-again Christians, those who have accepted Jesus Christ as their personal Savior, walked down the aisle to make that dedication of faith, who've been baptized, that's born again. If you didn't do it exactly like that, I'm sorry, you're doomed. Born-again Christians are the ones who are going to be raptured off the earth when Jesus appears in the clouds. And then this person called the Antichrist is going to emerge. Now, depending on your political persuasion, the Antichrist can be anyone from Barack Obama to Donald Trump and anywhere in between. Or Hillary Clinton. I don't think gender matters when it comes to the Antichrist. So folks pick who they want to be Antichrist. They believe that the Antichrist will sign a 7-year peace treaty with Israel, which will set in motion 7 years of this horrible time called the tribulation, when everything's going to fall apart on earth. But midway through the tribulation, the Antichrist is going to decide to break that treaty with Israel. And then the temple is going to be rebuilt. The Jewish temple is going to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. And the ancient Jewish practice of animal sacrifice will resume in the temple. But then the Antichrist is going to come along and destroy the temple, followed by 3.5 more years of tribulation. And then Jesus is going to come back 7 years after the rapture. And he's going to win this huge worldwide battle called Armageddon and reign for 1,000 years over converted Jews, because if you're not a converted Jew, you're also going to hell along with all Catholics. You guys do know I'm kidding, right? All right, just checking. And finally, after this 1,000-year reign, a final judgment will take place and a new Jerusalem will be established for all eternity. I know that sounds kind of crazy. You might need a little Dramamine after that roller coaster ride. But there are so many people who believe that the book of Revelation predicts exactly all of these things. I was one who was raised on it. Anybody else raised on this stuff? Mm-hmm. Okay. So people who believe in this specific sequence of events are called, it's a funny word, they're called dispensationalists. Because each of these periods of time, the rapture, the 1,000-year reign, the tribulation, these are called dispensations or chunks of time. And dispensation is a theological system that a lot of evangelical followers of Jesus, like the late Billy Graham or our former President George Bush, this is a theological system they actually believe in and follow. Now here is the kicker. In 2003, the Chronicle of Higher Education did a survey. And I thought, 2003, that's kind of late. So I actually did a little digging and found more recent statistics that they did in 2013. 47% of all Americans believe in some version of this end times theology that I just shared with you. 47%. That's nearly half of the country. Half. So how did we get here? How did we get to this place where these dispensational beliefs are held in some form by nearly half of the United States? Now you would think that a teaching that seems to be this widespread was a part of Christianity from the very beginning, right? That Jesus taught it, that's where we got it. Except we didn't. So you think, well, maybe it was in the first few hundred years of the establishment of the church, or maybe in the first millennium. It wasn't. Dispensationalism did not begin until, can I get a drum roll, please? 1830. In 1830, a 15-year-old girl by the name of Margaret MacDonald had a vision in a healing service in Glasgow, Scotland. And in her vision, she saw Christ returning twice. Now, it is an ancient Christian teaching from the very beginning that Jesus will return. We say it in our communion consecration sometimes, right? The mystery of our faith, right? Jesus is going to come back. But no one had ever said anything about twice before. She's the first time. She had this vision and she saw Jesus coming back in the clouds and all these Christians being sent up to be with him before he came back to earth. This was a really new teaching. No one had ever heard it before. And one of the people who heard it when she shared it in a revival was a man by the name of John Nelson Darby, who was a British evangelical preacher. And he latched on to this vision, and he decided he was going to go to the Bible and find verses to support it. Danger, 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 Will Robinson. Anytime you decide you have a belief and you're going to go to the Bible to find something there to support it, that's a real danger zone. It should be the other way around. But John Nelson Darby took the Bible and he came up with this dispensational system that I shared just a minute ago. Now, okay, you think, that's still 1830, a teenage girl and some preacher comes up with this thing. How did half of Americans come to believe this? Well, the story goes on to someone by the name of Cyrus Scofield. Anyone here ever own a Scofield Bible? Okay, a few of you are out there. Cyrus Scofield was an embezzler, he was a forgerer, and he had a fake doctorate degree. And he saw an opportunity here to make money. Wow. And he took John Nelson Darby's theological system and he created this huge set of charts and pictures and timelines, and he weaved it all together with the Bible to create the annotated Scofield Reference Bible that was first published in 1909 that sold millions of copies. Made him a lot of money. This lifted dispensationalism to a very high level of biblical authority. But that's still 1909, and this is 2016. So how did we get here still, where half the country believes this stuff? Who here has read a series of books called Left Behind? A few of us. There is a very wildly popular series of books called the Left Behind series. First written in 1995, and there have been so many sequels. There's 16 volumes now of Left Behind. And there's nothing wrong with these books per se as fictional books. They are fictionalized accounts of dispensationalism, about the rapture, about tribulation. They are written about this group of people called the Tribulation Force. And the book uses high-tech weaponry, sophisticated technology, reinforced military bunkers, all the trappings of war and all that stuff we love to glamorize in our big summer blockbuster movies, right? Sarah Hell will tell you, I love what I call big, dumb, special effects summer movies. Love them. Couldn't wait to see Independence Day. Love that stuff. And that's what's in the books. So they're really popular. And as a fictional story, there's nothing wrong with them. I really love the Da Vinci Code, and I really wanted it to be true. Yeah. Unfortunately, not so sure. But the line between fiction and non-fiction has always been really, really blurry with these books. If you go to the Left Behind website, this entire series is promoted right alongside a whole bunch of non-fiction books about dispensationalism. And all kinds of answers to frequently asked questions like, are we in the end times? How do we know? There are videos you can watch. And I actually told Jeremiah I was going to show one of them in my sermon, and then I decided it was just too creepy. I couldn't do it. But of course, all of this is there designed to do what? Sell the books, right? Yeah. Sell the books. They're really popular. People have enjoyed reading them. Nothing wrong with that. But what has happened is that millions of people have read these very popular, entertaining books and have come to believe that they represent an accurate and reliable interpretation of Revelation. And that all of the dispensational events that I mentioned earlier are going to take place. That's how we got to 47% of the country. Probably believes in at least the rapture. So, you might say, well, it's kind of interesting. Well, yeah, thanks. So, what does it matter? Is it really that big of a deal? Well, it matters because I'm sure we've all noticed that lately our world is being ripped apart at the seams by all kinds of violence. And much of that violence is driven by religion. Hatred and bigotry and misunderstanding in religion of all kinds. And it matters because thousands of people, especially in the Middle East, are working together to establish peace. You know, we never ever hear in the news about all the Muslims and the Jews, the Palestinians and the Israelis who are working together to bring peace to their land. But they are. The research I did this week, I found at least 13 organizations that are working to bring all those folks together for peace. And you know what? They don't want to be the pawns in somebody's end times game. But because largely driven, it's very, very politically complex, but driven by a huge amount of money given by evangelical Christians who by and large have the best of intentions. They are pouring money into Israel to make Israel victorious so that the Jews can start sacrificing in the temple again and control Jerusalem so that then Jesus can come back. Now the part they all kind of leave out is that, yeah, well, they think Jews are going to hell too. Right. Catholics, you'll have good company. Well, hey, I may be a Baptist, but I'm a lesbian. Let's just face it, we're all doomed, okay? They don't care, really. They just want the Jews to have Jerusalem again, so that then Jesus can come back and we can get on with the end times. That really is the goal. I know it sounds crazy, but that really is the goal. And so massive amounts of support are being poured into that region to try and pour gasoline on the fire of the conflicts there to bring all this about. That's why it matters. And there's another reason it matters. Do you remember what I said at the beginning of the sermon? 98% of our thoughts are unconscious, and our behaviors are driven by those unconscious thoughts, and those unconscious thoughts are driven by metaphor, repeated imagery, grammar. Here's why it matters. Everyone know what I mean if I say the word Armageddon? Y'all have an instant picture of what that is, right? Armageddon, bad. Armageddon is not the only metaphor in the book of Revelation. In fact, it has a teeny tiny little one-word reference. There are other metaphors in the book of Revelation, huge, beautiful metaphors nobody ever talks about, like the one that Rihanna read about. That city covered in pearls. What's not to love about that for our community? A city in pearls. We love pearls.
You don't love pearls.
That's true. I love them on you. But Rihanna read about a city covered in pearls that does not need the sun or the moon to shine because God's glory and Jesus the Lamb are the lamp. And the nations will walk by its light, and the rulers of the earth will bring their splendor into it, and the gates will never be shut. Nobody gets left behind ever. The glory and the honor of the nations will be brought into it. Here is a picture of the nations coming together into God's city. And remember, it's a fantastical vision. It's not meant to be literal. It's meant to open our eyes and our hearts to see what our world can be. John said, this horrible empire of Rome is not going to prevail. Bring it into today. This horrible violence we live in doesn't have to prevail. All of the nations and all of the faiths can work together to glorify the God of love.
Amen.
Now, what if that was the metaphor driving us? Mm-hmm. There's another metaphor in chapter 22, the tree of life. It says on either side of the river of life, there's this tree of life. And its fruit is born on the tree each month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations.
Yes.
The healing of the nations. The healing of the Christians and the Jews and the Buddhists and the Muslims and the Hindus and the not sures and the gays and the straights and the people of all colors and the people in wheelchairs and on crutches and all ages. The poor and the rich, the healing of everyone together. That is the most significant metaphor in the book of Revelation. How come all we know is Armageddon? 98%. What if 98% of our behavior was driven by these metaphors? What if 1/2 of our country was being driven by metaphors about the healing of the nations instead of Armageddon? You know, sometimes I feel weird preaching about Revelation because it just seems like it's just, who cares? But I care because I was raised on it and scared to death by it, and I want to save the people I shepherd from it. But even those of us who weren't given this, it's important to know what's in the Bible was given so that we can build up God's world and not just bide our time until some nuclear holocaust comes and wipes it clean. That is not abundant life. And that is not God's vision for this world. Revelation is God's vision for this world. But it's a beautiful vision of life and wholeness and people coming together, walking, holding hands, entering through pearly gates that are very different than how we usually think of those gates. Amen.
Amen.